Hey guys, welcome back to this topic. In this particular one, we are going to explore something known as parametric stairs, which means I have created a set of wavy parametric stairs. We have all seen staircases like these in a lot of designs, but what if we made it parametric, which means I can change the thickness, I can change the number of steps, I can change the kind of curvature my steps have, all of it with one single script. So let's go ahead and see how this works. So you see I have these original dimensions over here, which I can change like this, and this changes the x and the y size of my steps. I can create any type of steps that I want, so I can create something like this. I can also change the number of steps that I have. I can also go ahead and change it using these number sliders. This is the total height, which means I get to change the riser of every step. I can also go ahead and change the curvatures. So I have a curvature control over here, which changes this particular curvature like this. I can also go ahead and play around with this curvature. So you can get pretty interesting results with all of these varying sliders. And you can also change the number of steps that you want with this particular thing as you contour your steps. You can also control the tread length and the width like this. You can also control the one on the other side. And you can also go ahead and play around with the thickness of the tread like this. So let's go ahead and create this entire script out of scratch. So you can just go to File and create a new document. So let's create a base rectangle first, and then we can go ahead and start working on our script. So you can just type, you can just double click and type rectangle and bring this component in, which says create a rectangle on a plane. You will have something like this. Let's create a XY plane and hide it. So just double click and type XY, bring in the XY plane component and attach it to plane, and you can hide this one so that this plane is hidden. Use your central click and click on disable preview. Now let's go ahead and attach the x and the y size. So I'll just attach a size something like 67, and the other number slider I'll just make something like 100. Make two number sliders, 67 and 100. Attach this one to x, this one to y, and I'll have something like this. So once you're done with your rectangle, now we can actually proceed with the script. Now let's go ahead and move this particular rectangle in the z-axis by some distance. So I'll just double click and type move and move this rectangle, bring this component in and move it in the z-axis. You can also double click and bring in the unit z component to move it. Let's attach rectangle to geometry because you want to move the geometry, and you see it already moves it a little bit because unit z already has factor of 1, and this also has a factor of 1. It moves it by 1 units. We actually want to parametrically control that, so let's input something like 67.000 and I'll input this inside factor. So now we have something like this that we can control to move it on top. So once you're done with this, now let's actually divide this rectangle, this particular one that we just moved from here to here. Let's actually explode this particular rectangle into 4 pieces. So you can double click and type explode, bring in the explode component. You have seen this component in the previous topics. Just attach geometry to curve, and you see that your rectangle will actually split up into 4 parts. Now after you are done with this, now what you can do is you can actually select two of the vertices of these, two of the vertices from these 4 points that we have. So we can use the list item component to do that. We have all used the list item component in the previous topic. Let's use it over here also. You just double click and type list item. Bring in the list item component, and you can just first understand that you have 4 points. So out of the 4 points, we need to select only 2. So you'll have to create a number slider from 0 to 3 because Grasshopper starts everything from 0. So since you have 4 points, your 4 points will be indexed as 0, 1, 2 and 3. So we'll actually be creating a number slider from 0 to 3. So in order to do that, in a shortcut method, you can just double click and then you can type 0 less than 1 less than 3. Press enter. Now you have a number slider from 0 to 3. So I'll just keep it at 0, attach it to index, attach vertices to list, and there you go. I have selected 1 point. Now I'll just copy this entire arrangement on the bottom and I'll change this to 1. So now I have selected the 0th point, which is this one, the first point, which is this one. These 2 points I have selected using the list item component from this rectangle that I have just broken down. After you are done with this much, now what you can do is you can move this particular point, this point which has the index as 1, you can move this point in the minus z axis by the same distance that we had moved this particular rectangle. So let's try that out and see what happens. So you can double click and type move, bring in the move component, attach this to geometry, and in motion you can first of all bring in the z unit, and you can also bring in the negative component because we need to move it down, not up. Attach it to motion, and you can attach the same number slider that you used over here, which means this one. So I'll just attach it to factor, and now what happens is I move this particular point exactly over here by the exact distance, because this is the exact distance that I had moved this particular curve from the base. So now I move this particular point exactly on the bottom. So after you have moved this point on the bottom using these components, now what you can do is you can actually move this particular point in the x-axis using the move component again. So let's do that and see what happens. So you can just double click and type move, bring in the move component, and then you can double click and type x and bring in the unit x component, attach it to motion, and we'll also want to attach a division factor over here so that we can parametrically control this entire setup. So you can double click and type division, bring in a division thing, and you can attach a number slider and you can input something like 4.3. So just type 4.3, maybe 324, something like this, and attach it to B maybe, and inside A will actually be attaching this particular number slider that we have right here, this one, the X size. I'll be explaining why we did that. So let's attach this first. So inside A I have attached this number slider, which was actually in the X size of my rectangle. Now let's attach the geometry. This is the geometry that we want to move. Now you see I have moved this particular point in the X direction, in the X vector, but I have attached a division component which allows me to increase and decrease the movement that I have. So I have kept it at something like 4.3. So we'll actually take a look at how this movement helps us in a little while, but before that let's actually create the curve that we actually want to have. So after creating that curve, I'll be explaining all of these things that we did and why we did them exactly the way we did them. So after you are done with this much, so we have this point right here that we have just moved in the x-axis. We also need to do the similar thing with the bottom point. We need to move it in the minus x-axis and bring it somewhat over here. So let's do that first. So the bottom point that I have right here is right over here. this is the one. So let's move it in the same direction. For that, I'll just copy all of this. So I'll select this and hold shift and select this and this and this, and I'll just use alt and I'll copy all of this. After I've copied it, I'll attach geometry to geometry, and as you can see, we have to attach a negative to this, otherwise this is moving in this direction. I wanted to move it in this particular direction. So let's double click and type negative and bring in this negative component, attach it like this over here, and now as you can see, it's moving in this direction. So you can actually control this movement and this movement according to what you want. Now since we have established these 4 points, now what we actually will do is we'll create a NURBS curve between all of these 4 like this, which will establish the base curve of our flowing staircase. Now after I do that, I'll actually be explaining why we have done all of these things and how did they actually work out. So let's double click and type NURBS and bring in this NURBS curve right here. You can find this component under curve tab under the spline section. So let's attach all the points in order. So this one will be the first, this one will be the second, and the third and the fourth one. So let's attach them in order. First one is over here, the second one is over here, hold shift and attach it. Third one goes right here, and the third one will be this one, not this one, because we need to attach it in order like this. So the third point will be here, the fourth one will be this one. And as you do so, you see we've already established this flow, and you can now control this flow using these number sliders. And I can also do it on the bottom over here, which will actually give me a nice curvature, something like this. So now I've established the curvature of the steps that I actually want. Now what you can actually do is you can actually extract a segment of your curve, a segment from the shattered curve component that you have used right about here. So in the segments component, we have all the curves, all the exploded curves of this particular rectangle. So you can just double click and type curve, bring in the curve component and isolate this part over here and bring this component right over here. So you have all of these components. Now what we need to do is we need to select one single line from over here. We need to select only one single element. So let's use the list item component to do that. So you can just double click and type list item, bring in the list item component. Also understand there are 4 lines, so your data tree structure will go like 0, 1, 2 and 3. So you need to make a number slider that starts from 0 and ends at 3. So you can double click and type 0 less than 1 less than 3. It's a shortcut for creating number sliders, and you will have the number slider that you need. And plug this in index and plug this in list. And now let's change this to 2. So we have this thing right here, something like this. Now after you have that, now you have this particular curve on the end and you have this particular curve. So now what we can do is we can keep both of these over here, and we can now turn off everything else that we have created. But before we do that, let's go through the process of what we have just done. So what we have just done is we have created this rectangle, and then we moved it in the z-axis first. Then we exploded this moved rectangle into 4 different parts of curves and points, and then we selected both these points, and we have then moved this particular point over here, and this particular point on the bottom over here. After we have moved them accordingly, we created a NURBS curve using the NURBS curve component using all of the 4 points, and then we have isolated these curves and extracted only one curve out of it. Now since we know what we have done exactly, now what we'll do next is we'll create a surface using the four curve surface or the four. After we have done this, we'll actually create a surface using these two things. So let's go under the surface tab and let's see. I guess you'll find edge surface over here. Bring in edge surface. So it can actually create a surface using two curves. So you bring this in over here, even put the second one over here, and there you go. This is exactly what we need. We have constructed the base surface to create our steps. So if you have errors like this, you can just use this particular icon and turn it to high quality so that it gets fixed. Now you have a perfect surface that you can actually create your steps on.